Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about the apps I use as a PhD student at Oxford. By and large, my job looks like sitting in front of a desk and typing and interacting with the computer. So it's very important the apps I use, and my productivity hinges on using these apps. So I'm going to share a few apps I use as a PhD student, and they would be divided into 4 categories. One is research, the second is coding, the third is productivity, and the fourth would be personal. So for example, what apps I use to record videos for you. So let's dive right into it. The first app I use is Obsidian. Now Obsidian is a note-taking app. So this is how Obsidian looks like. I have configured it to start with the home page as today's page with the date on it. So one thing I like to do, and I hope to do in fact every day, is write down a few things I'm grateful for. So I could write down things like I am grateful for the breakfast I ate today. But the cool thing about Obsidian is that things link onto each other. So let me give you an example. Here are some ideas I've had for YouTube videos, and every note in Obsidian could have a linked note. So if I click on this, it will actually take me to this page where I've used to plan this particular video. So the core feature of Obsidian that it can have linked notes, and this makes it really convenient. For example, when you're doing a scientific study and you need to link to some previous study that was cited, I could use the linked notes feature. The next app I use is Notion. Now Notion is a dashboard for my PhD. It can do many things, and I'm not even going to try to summarize what it does. But essentially you can create spreadsheets with Notion, you can create checklists with Notions, you can create a marketing sales campaign with Notion. So it can do a lot. Think of it like Excel, but more wordy and more verbose. The next app I use is called Scrivener. Now Scrivener is a writing app used by novelists and people who write long form content. I use Scrivener to write my master's thesis. I wrote Scrivener to write my transfer report, which is something that you submit in between getting a full PhD and after you've started. The reason why I like Scrivener a lot is because on the left hand side you can create chapters and pages, and what you can segregate data on the left hand side, and then you can just click on that to only see that page. Now this is different from Microsoft Word, where you just see this huge blob of text and it's kind of hard to focus on the key bits that you're working on. And because of this specificity, I really like using Scrivener to write long form content. The next app I use is Zotero. Now Zotero is what's called a reference manager. As an academic, you have to read a lot of papers. This folder that I have these papers in can get large and messy, and these PDFs have all these weird names. So what a reference manager does is takes in all of these PDFs and parses the PDF files to see what their title is, who the authors are, and so on, and then makes it easily searchable and accessible. So if I want to pull up some paper I read 2 years ago, and if I remember anything about it, like the title or the people who wrote it or the journal it was published in, I can just type in that particular thing and it will pull out that paper, hopefully. It is an absolute must-have for anyone who deals with a large amount of publications. The next app I'm going to talk about, and it's a bit experimental, I don't use it a lot, but I've definitely played around with it, and it's this tool called Elicit. Now Elicit is a research assistant that is powered by AI. Now typically around 80% of the time, if I want to find papers, I would go to Google Scholar or I would go to PubMed. These are old school search engines, and sometimes you don't know the specific keywords that you should use. For example, how do having social connections affect your tendency to be physically ill? So let's just say common cold, for example. There's a very famous study that's done, by the way, which shows the larger the size of your social network, the less your propensity to get a common cold. The final app I'm going to put in the category of research is Prolific. Now Prolific is just simply a platform that I use to recruit participants to do my study. Now it sounds very simple, and can't you just put an advert out there? Like out of where? Like on Google Ads? And how do you pay these people? Because participants in my study have to be compensated, and Prolific just takes care of all of that process. Okay, category number 2 is Now my favorite programming language, at least these days, is R. And I absolutely love R's capability to analyze data in easy to understand syntax, and it's quick, it's robust, and it's pretty. It produces pretty plots. And the app I use to code R in is, no surprise here, RStudio. Now RStudio is just a simple IDE, integrated development environment for R. If you're someone who is considering learning to program, I highly recommend starting with R and starting with RStudio. I actually have a class on Skillshare right now which teaches you the basics of R. Check it out, it's not sponsored by Skillshare. The next software I use is called PyCharm, and this is the software I use to program in Python. Now R is great for data science, but its abilities to do general programming are relatively limited. Python, on the other hand, is a giant. It's one of the most popular programming languages ever. So when I get MRI scans, a lot of that neuroimaging software is written in Python. So if I use Python, I'm able to work well with imaging data. Python is also great for doing utilities-based tasks like copying things from here to there, renaming a large chunk of folders. And the final app I use, and this is probably my current favorite text editor, and it's called VS Code. I have been a user of Atom for the last many years, and just recently Microsoft discontinued Atom in favor of focusing all their attention to VS Code. VS Code is simply good, it's lightweight, but at the same time it's fast, and this is the editor I use right now to code my task. So when people are doing the experiment I have done, I've coded that experiment in VS Code. This category is the productivity category. The first app I use in the productivity category, it's one of my absolute favorites. It's called TextExpander. Now it's a brutally simple app, and all it does is it takes in some snippet and then expands it to something else. So for example, I can type in name and then it would expand to my name, or I can type in email and it would expand to my email. And the reason why it's so useful is because we type in the same thing so many times. So for example, your email signature, for example, your email address, for example, your phone number, your credit card information. What TextExpander can do for you is save all the hassle of remembering these things. One of my favorite uses is when I release a podcast, I have a snippet which is just called podcast, which allows me to type in whatever I want to type in about that particular episode, but then pastes in all the rest of the call to actions like subscribe to me on Spotify, or look me up on YouTube, and so on, or join my mailing list, which you should. If you haven't already, join my mailing list. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I share there. So the next software is in fact LastPass. I've been using LastPass for over a decade now. Essentially all the passwords I've ever created in the last decade or so are on LastPass. So it has to be very secure. Now I'm not attached to LastPass in any way. You can use any other password manager like 1Password or Dashlane or all of these things right there. But I personally use LastPass. So all you need to do is remember a master password, but it also generates passwords for you. So now that you're no longer restricted by the limitation of remembering your password, LastPass can generate these complex, weird passwords, and it can store it for you, which you never have to remember. And automatically your websites and your accounts are much more secure because LastPass has generated these fancy passwords for you. Now feel free to use again any of the other password managers or iCloud, it works as well. But LastPass is something I've used for a very long time. The next app I'm going to talk about is Fantastical. Now Fantastical also is one of my all-time favorites. What it does is basically takes a natural language and turns it into calendar events or reminders. So for example, if I want to have dinner with John tomorrow at 5 p.m, then I would, 5 p.m. might be too early for dinner, so let's say 7 p.m. So I would just type in Fantastical, hey, dinner with John tomorrow 7 p.m, location XYZ. And what this will do is create a calendar event titled Dinner with John, and it will add in the time and it will add in the location, and it might even send an invite to John if you've specified that. Now this app probably has saved me more frustration than any of the other apps I've talked about, and it's an app called Keyboard Maestro. Now what Keyboard Maestro does is it automates certain things that you would have to do manually. So for example, one of the things I have to do for my DPhil is log into a remote server and use a computer remotely. Now the steps involved to make that happen are annoying. Like you have to get some SSH logins, then you have to do a virtual screen and then connect it through VNC and all of these fancy things. And yeah, they are as boring as it sounds, and they involve multiple clicks and password entries and so on. But what Keyboard Maestro can do is automate all of that. So I have this, I just click one button or type in a keyword and it performs all of these keystrokes / mouse clicks for me. Done for you. The next app is Alfred, and Alfred is one of my most used apps, and the reason for that is it's just so easy to open it. Now we all know about the Spotlight on Mac, which you press Command Space and you get to do whatever you want there. So like open files or search the web or do some calculator operations. Now Alfred is a Spotlight replacement and it's just slightly more powerful than Spotlight. So for example, one of my biggest use case for Alfred is doing a Google search right inside Alfred. So I can just start typing my Google search and press enter, and then it will open it directly on Google. So I don't have to manually open Safari, then type in google.com, then click on the search box and then search something. You can just type in whatever you want and then it opens right in Google. It also saves your frequently visited websites if you open it through Alfred. And so one of the sites that I visit a lot is my dashboard for my website, where I can create new blog posts or write emails to my email list and so on. I can just put in a few keywords and it will directly take me to that. But if I were to type in the thing, that's a bit of a problem because I have many pages that start in with Sankalp Garud, and there's so many suggestions that come in which it would take me much longer to manually type in the whole URL. But because I have it saved it as a bookmark on Alfred, I just type in 2 or 3 letters and then voila, the right website is in front of me. So that's one of the use cases I have for Alfred. Another use case is to search files. Now Spotlight does it as well, but I've just found Alfred's search indexing to be a bit faster because it's not essentially indexing everything, but it's only indexing specific folders that I've asked it to index, and which is why it's just a bit quicker, I find, and more responsive. The next software I'm going to mention is a bit of an underdog, and that is Reminders. Now throughout this whole video, I have avoided talking about Microsoft Word or Safari or Chrome, these kinds of apps. All of us know about them. And Reminders should technically fall in that category. But the reason I mention it here is because I have been a huge productivity nerd growing up. I purchased OmniFocus when I was just in school. I read David Allen's GTD back in the day. So I have used fancy task management software and more or less all of them. At least I've tried all of them. And I have found OmniFocus to be very good. But at some point I realized that it's just too powerful in some ways and it's not making it easy for me to just create a few lists. And Reminders right now does exactly that. It's just neat, it syncs across all my devices and it opens up quickly. So anytime I have a personal type of a task, for example, if I want to shop for a few things, then I would just put them in Reminders and not bother with having like fancy software. So right now I'm not using something like OmniFocus or Things. My PhD tasks go in Notion and my personal tasks go in Reminders. And finally, my favorite category, well, I've just said that about all categories, haven't I? But finally, the category which I call personal/personal branding/personal work or hobby work, whatever you want to call it, passion projects. The first one is Descript. Now Descript is also a bit new in my arsenal. I've been a big Final Cut editor, and before that I also have a certificate in Adobe software like Premiere. So I've used these fancy big media powerhouses like Final Cut and Premiere. But right now Descript has come in and totally revolutionized how I edit. What it does is it takes the video, it takes the audio from it and then transcribes that audio, so that now instead of editing the video as a timeline, which most video editors do, you edit it as like a Word document almost. So if you remove something from the document, it removes or edits it from the video. And so it makes it ridiculously easy to find things that you want to cut, to find places where you want to add some musics, and it also makes it ridiculously easy to create content which is short form out of it. So create TikTok clips or something like that. All of this would be much more difficult because you'll have to create like markers about where things are, where things end when you do it in a fancier software. But Descript makes it so much more easier. By far the most popular question I get asked is, how do I record my podcast? So if you haven't checked out, I have a podcast called Understanding Emotions. It's available Spotify, Apple Podcasts, everywhere. And what do I use for that? And I will probably make another bigger video on all the gear I use. But in terms of software, I use Audacity. Now Audacity is a free software which can record audio for you. And it's really simple, easy to use, and it's free. But the reason why I am totally sold on Audacity for, again, more than a decade now is because of its excellent, phenomenal noise reduction features. Now, if you have a microphone, which is good, so I actually use a condenser microphone, it will pick up a lot of noise from the room. Now, what Audacity can do, it has features, is that it will just eliminate that background noise and give you clean, crystal clear audio. I highly recommend you check out any episode of my podcast, and that will give you an idea of how good the Audacity noise reduction algorithm is and how good my voice sounds in the podcast. I've received several compliments about the audio quality of my podcast, and a large part of it is the microphone, but the other part of it is Audacity's amazing noise reduction capabilities. The next app I want to share about is Ghost. Now Ghost is where my website is hosted. This is where if you type in sankalpguru.org, you end up at my Ghost site. And this is just basically a blog site. When I started my website, I started it on WordPress. But at some point, they made massive changes to their payment plans and it became ridiculously expensive to host on WordPress. Now Ghost is awesome because it's much faster and it's geared towards blog/publishing. So on one hand, where WordPress is trying to be this all-in-one sort of a platform, Ghost is just specifically geared toward publishing and blogs and podcasts and those kinds of things, which is why the editor is much more responsive and fast, and it has a built-in email integration. Email IDs, if you don't know, are the best way to reach out to people, because in any other platform like YouTube, as much as I like video, or Facebook, these platforms are all owned by big tech. And they could do anything and all our audiences could go away. So one great way to live on this internet essentially is to have email IDs with you. So if you would like to know more about what I do, some behind the scenes, some tips on emotional intelligence, like a central hub for many things and many projects that I'm involved with, including my PhD, I would invite you to get the behind the scenes look in my email list. So just type in sankalpguru.org and type in your email address, and I will show up maybe once a week, maybe once in every 2 weeks, but it will be good, valuable content. So on that note, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it valuable, and I hope you found some apps that could be useful to you. Now again, I want to repeat that I've not included Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, but these are apps that I use. And I just think that all of us know about them. And I thought I would include apps that are not as common, but are equally useful, if not more. So I hope you enjoyed. Good luck with your research or productivity or whatever, and I will see you in the next video.